Welcome back, everyone, to another session of Advancing with Watercolor. This week, we're continuing our subject on the farmers market based in the city of Sarlat in the Dordogne Valley in southern France. We're going to be looking at a very complex subject and working with the figure. We've done some studies of figures in the past. We're going to be looking at the tonal study that we did in preparation for the painting. And finally, we're going to be doing a full color painting of the scene of the farmers market in Sarlat. There is a helpful PDF file located below, so download that and follow with me as we paint the farmers market in Sarlat. Not really overalls, but okay, let's discuss what I have in my drawing here, and we'll start with the center of interest, which is some figures here. Let's just block in their body and the head. Main figure. We have some figures on the side as well. Distant figures. We have a large figure kind of coming through the scene. Kind of down in the corner here, where he's not going to attract too much attention, but look at this combination of near, mid-ground, and distance. That really helps to create depth and a feeling of a lot of people, very busy scene, but we're structuring the figures to create depth. We're using some of the poses that we practiced in our drill when we worked with figures. We have an awning coming across, oops. And then we have the backdrop of Sarlat. And I do pay attention on a couple things. Let me point those out. One is the main tower, the shape of the main tower, which you can see in my sketch. You can see it in the photograph as well, that main tower of Sarlat, the medieval looking thing. And rising above everything else. And then some of the rooftops, the village rooftops. Two pitched roofs here. This is very much in line with the photograph that I'm using to help me. And one more, just the beginning of an awning here. We might not even use this, I'm not sure yet. Again, to kind of give us a feeling that we're walking through the marketplace. So naturally these awnings are going to rise over our head. Our head is sort of in line with the figures. We see a stall with a big crate of fruits or veggies, more in the mid-ground, and yes, even some in the distance. Far in the distance we have same sort of repeated shapes. So repeated shapes help us to create feeling of depth, and they also create sort of a visual theme or refrain, which is very good for painting. It's nice to have that musicality. Okay, so our light source is sort of up and to the left, just coming over the tops of some of the roofs. It's kind of striking these rooftops here, shadows through here, a little light sneaking through so that we can illuminate our scene. That's my thought anyway. My tonal study and my thought is to work with a dark main subject, dark against light. So I'm going to try and keep this area rather pale, a little darker coming in from the top and bottom, darker below, but relatively mid-tones, and then use my darks to kind of draw attention to this area on shaping some of the stalls, creating some shadows, little parts to give a little more weight to that area. Mid-tone, 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 some darks, some lights through here as well. Perhaps a break in the shadows coming through here. Again, sort of alluding to the direction of light. All right. My color scheme. What's going to be my color scheme? My color scheme is very warm, cool sky. Let's start with some cool sky, and we're going to have some coolness below. So coolness above, coolness below, but a lot of warm tones through here to kind of carry the feeling of sunlight and the warm ochre color of the buildings, and some festive colors in our stands and in our patrons. Warm colors on the ground, but overlaying that with some cool shadows and a pale, cool sky behind. So I haven't named any colors yet. Excuse me. How do I do this? I'm going to put this off to the side to look at it. I haven't named colors, but I'm thinking a cerulean and yellow ochre in the sky, yellow ochre, burnt sienna through the buildings, followed by a little bit of ultramarine blue, and burnt sienna and yellow ochre, cad red through the stalls, with a little bit of lavender and a little bit of blue on top of that as well. Okay, I think that's going to do it. Here we go with our color, and I'm going to start with a big brush to get things started. Paper towel, big brush. And I'm going to mop up this because it's got some quinacre gold, which I like as a color, but I don't want to use in this painting. I don't want to, because it's a very acrid or almost a sour color. Acrid or almost a sour color. So let's get rid of that. Clean slate for the most part. All right, so let's start with yellow ochre. There we go. Plenty of yellow ochre. It's a nice warm hue to think about, to create a feeling of sunlight. It also works well with the blues of lavender and ultramarine and cerulean. All the blues seem to work pretty well with the yellow ochre. It's another good reason to use it. And I'm going to just start coming across the middle here. Kind of isolate these awnings for the most part. And just water up above the palest of yellows. A little bit more water to keep that very pale. And I'm going to carry it over these awnings to my left. Right down to here. I'll cut under these awnings to my right. Sort of like that. But look at it, it's very pale, so it's not a significant color yet. I'm going to put just a little more through here. Okay, so we're wet on top. Let's go with a little bit of cerulean. Might as well mix my cools down here. Because I won't be able to do that effectively up above. There, all right. Warm scene, isn't it? Very warm scene. Cerulean is right here. Might add a little cobalt to that. Yeah, something about like that. Just starting to come down into the sky a little bit. So that yellow ochre comes through the cerulean. The cerulean keeps, it's a warm blue, so it's kind of consistent with what we want to do in the sky there. I'm going to just lift a little bit off of there. And also I'm going to just make it a little paler through here. On these sunstruck parts, using my paper towel. So while we're waiting for this to dry, we can start to set the stage below. And I'm going to start with the same yellow ochre. I'm going to leave some whites here though. A little piece of light moving through here. Some whites in the stalls where they're selling fruits and vegetables. Just little pieces of light like this. And I'm going to add a little bit of burnt sienna to that. Burnt sienna, not alizarin crimson. Maybe alizarin crimson. And we'll add some of that to the ground here. Just kind of block it in. Maybe some of those whites. A little better shape there. And that's enough, I think. That's for this stage. Just want to get some of those warm hues to come out a little more. Okay, let's let this dry, the stage dry, and then we're going to come back to it when we need hard edges up above, some hard edges through the midground, hard edges here and there to create the feeling of objects, you know, three-dimensional objects. We need some hard edges. So we need to dry off the painting. Let's do that. Okay, let's remember we're going to start, we want to keep our main subject dark against a lighter background, but we still need to see the profile of the city. So I'm going to start with a wash of another warm, well, kind of a grayed yellow ochre, picking up some of that blue below. But rather pale. And I want to kind of cover the buildings left to right, and then introduce a shadow wash coming from the upper left down to the lower right hand side of the buildings. All right, so we have to work a little fast here. And I'm going to cut across these awnings. These are the rooftops of Sarlat, all in shadow, so we can really use a gray color, and even underneath a little paler down to here. Want to keep that distant awning sort of pale. Okay, so let's go now into this wash. Let's keep this wash sort of wet. And I'm going to go up into the tops of those rooftops. Just a little darker, cooler version of this gray. The smaller brush. And start to paint this beautiful spire. Some detail. I'm going to give just a little extra dark below here. Keep this moving somewhat. I'm going to get even a little darker. You gotta be careful when I pick up fresh paint. Mix it well. Dilute that a little bit. And let's continue up the left-hand side. I'm just going to put a little bit of that over here. Soft edges, soft edges. Okay, let's start with our yellow ochre again. We're going to do the same thing, same process to the right side basically. Yellow ochre. And come up here. I'm going to start very wet. Almost just water up here. Ain't that whole shape. Like this. And then, yeah, maybe a little bright yellow ochre here. Follow it with the bluer gray. Just a minute. Bluer gray. That means more of this ultramarine blue mixed with a little bit of yellow ochre. Oops. And we'll go behind our figures to behind the awnings. So that we get sort of a unified feeling to that shadow coming across. Nice watercolor feel. Maybe a little higher. Just want to feel like sunlight is just starting to hit the scene, so I'm being pretty loose about it. A little water through here. And we'll carry that down with just water for the moment. Then I'm going to go with even more blue through here. Blue or gray, I'm sorry. A little bit of burnt sienna and ultramarine blue, but it's pretty well diluted. Right over those. Blend it. We'll define that area a little more as we add our darks. Just like that. Good. I'm going to add some burnt sienna here and there while it's wet. Just little touches, not blend them too much. So everything has kind of that mid-tone with a few isolated lights. I'm going to go just a bit more blue through here. As I know I have a lot of water on the brush, so I don't want it to dry too pale. Well, let's start to place some of our darks. I'm going with burnt sienna, my main figure. I'll be going back and forth. Burnt sienna. To ultramarine blue, create some distant figures. I think it's a good idea when you're composing with figures to start with some blobs like we're doing here. Organizing around a center of interest. Well, here we have three fellows shopping. Or maybe not, maybe they're just chatting. And organizing around your main figures, a little brighter color into the main figure. But borrowing from the same colors we're using elsewhere. A lot of blue, for example, into our figures. Oops. And I want to keep them sort of the same height. Some figures working behind the scenes to stock, or maybe they're in the distance looking at another side. Anyway, we start to build the figures this way. And I'm going to use, some concentrated color in the shadows or lower parts of the figure. Shadow just means a little darker touch. But I'm really reserved about how much of that shadow to use at this stage. Some, yes, but definitely not too much. Okay, let's continue to add shadows here. And we're leaving that blue for the moment. Some boxes and legs underneath. Washing burnt sienna over this. Some yellow ochre, more burnt sienna. Added while it's wet so it bleeds, as watercolor is apt to do, and sometimes that causes us to panic, but it actually ends up drying pretty nicely. Some stalls that are closer. Let's come underneath the umbrella. Let's work on the left side for the moment. I'm coming underneath this umbrella, for example. And I'm going to come with a little darker mix. Poles, signage. Same two colors, just letting them mix. Burnt sienna. We'll close off this left-handed side, make it feel a little more focused on our main figures. We'll do the same under here. Going to a smaller brush here, and taking some sepia, which is related to these colors we've been dropping down, but I want to use some, try to introduce a little bit of a stronger dark and see how that plays with the other colors. Makes the light feel a little more brilliant, doesn't it? And I'm going to wash over that patch of light with a little bit of burnt sienna, like so. I'm starting to relate things a little more now. Let's blend that a little bit. It's a little too streaky. Just add more of that sienna and let it kind of head downwards. I'm going to add now, I got my ultramarine blue, burnt sienna. Let's make this figure a little darker. Made them a little wider too. A few more details to these figures. Okay, I think I need for it to dry a little bit. Wanted to keep a couple lines there. Let's just move on. I'm getting a little obsessive. So let's put our big figure here, coming through the scene. Try to take care of this line. Big fellow. And start off, I see his shoulders here. And head about here. Another customer back here. And I'm going to kind of, while this is wet, take some of this ultramarine blue. And just blend this whole corner with more of that ultramarine blue. Right. And just put a little more of that across the bottom. Alright, so the figures are happening. We have a nice entrance to the painting. We need to introduce some darks. Where would we use those darks? Let's use a few of them through here. Still kind of wet there, so things are blending. Using a small brush now because I want to preserve some of those browns and some of those lighter blues if I can. That dried light yet again. Might even do it third time, we'll see. Amazing what you can do with two colors. Watercolor is doing most of the work. Let's give it credit. Okay. Let's put a little red. Small brush. This person's walking towards us. Let's take some time to let that dry off and come up here and do a little dry brush. So it's very, very light. I'm using a light warm hue. In this sunstruck roof. trying not to paint outlines, trying to paint more like calligraphy. Some windows. They have beautiful shuttered windows in this part of the Dordogne. In Sarlat, I should say. Well, all over, all the villages. Oops. A little too dark. Shape is good, but it's a little too dark. What's going on here? Some rooftop. Steep angle. Okay. I want to put a white coat onto this guy here. So basically dry, but we want to put a little darker passage where the coat opens up. Like that. And some overalls. Maybe I use a little white. So not really overalls, but more like what the butcher might wear. We have to be a little methodical at this point. Especially the main characters, it's easy to carry this sort of detail everywhere, but we really only need it on the main characters. All these figures in the distance can be just nothing more than blobs. I'm going to paint a little bit of this gray color onto the awnings, but I start with just a little touch of water where the plane changes, where it goes from the light top to the shadowed side. Some windows, more windows into the shadows. All of these windows line up on lines of perspective. Very steep as we go higher. Keeping the lines pretty light because I don't want them to be intrusive. Bit harsh back here. Soften that out. I'm going to take a little water and just blend this area a little bit. Carry this all across the front here, starting about where my main figure is, coming down through here. I want to put a little darker shadow at the base of these stalls. So I'm mixing burnt sienna and ultramarine blue, pretty strong. And put some in here. Then take a little wider brush and just a little darker near the stalls. just to give a suggestion of the angle of the light, a little bit of that sharp angle. And I'm going to come to the left side of my figure here, deepen that a little bit as well. Starting off with kind of this pale, warm hue. And while it's warm, just a little bit against the side. And then kind of blend it into the rest. Okay. Here we go. Some final details. These details are pavers into the pavement, of course. We're using a small brush. These strokes are have the same sort of function as the windows or the architectural elements up above. This means that they create a sort of perspective. I rest my hand and try to execute and notice how the lines are not uniform, they're kind of broken. This lends itself to the material that we're painting, which are likely bricks or stones or uneven pavers. So I'm just kind of placing little lines that narrow as they get back. I don't have these drawn in, but I have a pretty good sense of how they go. And this has a couple of benefits. One benefit is that we get a feeling of the surface of the ground. I'm just going to rest my hand here. Looking for a good hand posture. I think this is going to be the best here. Yeah. So these accomplish a couple things. Give us a lay of the ground. A feeling of the surface of the ground. They make the shadows feel transparent, which is the main reason I'm using them in this case. I don't think they really add much more than that. Just a feeling of depth. Old world, yes. Definitely feels like, you know, we're in the Dordogne region when we see pavers on the ground like this, or it could be any old European city. It's another reason to do it. So a few we accomplish a few things by doing this sort of activity. So we get a feel of the ground, transparency in the shadows, a feeling of the old world architecture. Something that's important to this scene, I think you'd agree, is we want that old world quality. So putting a few of these pavers, and you notice that my lines are broken, and what I'm looking for now is that joint where the stones meet each other. And this helps to create more texture, more of a feeling that they're laid into the ground.